My name is Jared Monroe, and on the morning of my divorce hearing, every breath felt measured. Every heartbeat drummed a steady reminder that today would change everything. I arrived at the courthouse before dawn, the sky still bruised in shades of purple and gray, the stone pillars looming like silent judges over the marble steps. My suit was pressed, my tie knotted just so, and I carried nothing but a slender briefcase containing legal briefs and a resolve I'd spent the last 3 weeks sharpening. I told myself I was ready for anything: spousal support, property division, custody arguments. But I hadn't prepared for the sight that greeted me when Leah and her attorney swept through the doors 15 minutes later. There she was, poised and confident, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek knot, her eyes bright with triumph. And at her side, arm in arm, was Bryce Holloway. The man she had left me for, the man whose name I had only whispered in anger and betrayal, now walked beside her as if he owned this day. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit that hugged his broad shoulders, his cufflinks glinting in the low light, and he nodded at me with a smirk so cold it felt like a challenge. Leah's lips curved into a triumphant smile as she caught my gaze, as though she believed she had already won. For a moment, doubt crept in, a serpent coiling around my courage, whispering that perhaps she had succeeded in erasing me. But I straightened my spine, inhaled deeply, and reminded myself that this courtroom would not be her stage alone. It would be, unexpectedly, my battlefield. What neither Leah nor Bryce knew was that I had orchestrated a quiet revolution these past 3 weeks, one built on evidence and truth, and that the real witness they feared most would be seated quietly behind them. They had assumed their power in public, their alliance unshakable. They had no inkling that Bryce's own wife had stepped through those doors mere moments before them, determined to testify against him. As Leah settled into the plaintiff's row and Bryce offered her an encouraging squeeze of the hand, I allowed my eyes to flick toward the back of the courtroom. There, 3 rows behind them, sat Tessa Holloway, Bryce's wife of 12 years, her posture straight, hands folded calmly in her lap, her gaze fixed unwaveringly on the front. I felt a surge of vindication. The elegant stranger in the 3rd row, wearing a tailored navy skirt suit and holding a modest leather satchel, was the catalyst I had planted, the voice of reason I had summoned to dismantle the charade Leah had constructed. I remembered the moment I decided to involve her, when my lawyer, Maya Griggs, told me Leah's character witness was listed as Bryce Holloway, and I realized the man in the hotel receipts, the one behind Leah's late-night texts and clandestine meetings, had a wife who deserved to know the truth. It had been a risky gambit to contact Tessa, to lay bare the receipts, the photos, the hotel bills, but from the first tremor in her voice when I described what I had uncovered, I knew she would stand with me. Now, as I watched her sit silently, I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, the resolve forming in her heart. We had found each other at the intersection of betrayal and justice, 2 wounded spouses united by a determination not for revenge but for clarity, for dignity, and for the chance to speak truth to power. The bailiff called us to order, the gavel's echo reverberating through the lofty chamber, and I felt every eye in the room settle on Leah's table. Her attorney began with the standard opening, praising her honesty, her integrity, her right to a fair division. Bryce rose to speak on her behalf, his confident voice painting Leah as a devoted mother and compassionate partner. My stomach knotted as I watched him regale the court with anecdotes of her kindness, her generosity, her unshakable character. I could almost taste the injustice, the sticky bitterness at the back of my throat. Then Maya rose, her presence calm but commanding, and I leaned forward, heart pounding, as she requested that Bryce be sworn in. When he stepped up, he still carried that air of triumph, until Maya asked one simple question. "Mr. Holloway, how long have you been romantically involved with Mrs. Leah Monroe?" The hush that fell was so complete it pressed against my ears, the tension in the room palpable. Leah's smile faltered, and Bryce's face drained of color as he glanced toward the gallery and locked eyes with Tessa. She did not flinch. When he answered, his voice barely above a whisper, 9 months. It cracked through the courtroom like a rifle shot. I felt a swell of something fierce and righteous as Tessa stood at Maya's next summons. She walked forward with a grace that belied the pain she carried, each step a testament to her resolve to reclaim her life. As she began to speak, her voice clear and unwavering, I knew nothing would ever look the same for any of us. Today, truth would walk into this courtroom in heels, and it would not be silenced. It started with a name. That's all it took to flip the gears in my head and set everything in motion. One name buried inside a document I should have ignored. One line my lawyer almost skipped right over. "They're bringing in a character witness," Maya had said casually, flipping through Leah's submitted paperwork across the conference table. Bryce Holloway. Ring any bells? I remember freezing in my chair. I'd heard that name before. I'd seen that name. It was printed at the top of a receipt I found in Leah's purse 3 months ago. Some upscale hotel in the city, one she said was for a spa weekend with the girls. I didn't question it at the time, not out loud, but I remembered how the logo on the receipt didn't match the spa brochures she brought home. I remembered how she rushed to tuck it away when I walked in. And now that same name was back, written on legal forms meant to secure her freedom from me. I asked Maya to repeat it, just to be sure I wasn't making something up in my head. "Bryce Holloway," she said again, watching me carefully now. "You okay?" I nodded, but my mind was spinning. I pictured the photo I'd found 2 weeks earlier, a blurry capture on her phone of a man's shoulder and part of his smile. She had tried to crop it before saving it, but not carefully enough. I'd asked her about it, and she lied so easily, said it was from an old dinner party. But now the pieces clicked into place like a lock turning open. Bryce wasn't just some distraction or fleeting affair. He was the reason she felt brave enough to drag me through this public, expensive mess. She wasn't trying to escape a failed marriage. She was building a new one on the ashes of mine. The contact in her phone that read, "Lunch with Elle," that wasn't one of her coworkers, like she'd told me. That was him. That was Bryce. And suddenly, everything. The tension, the secrets, the way she started coming home later, putting passwords on everything, acting like I was the intruder, made brutal, blinding sense. My first instinct was to blow it up, confront her, drag her through court right then, force her to admit every lie in front of a judge and jury. But something stopped me, something deeper than rage. It was humiliation. It was knowing she expected me to lash out, to react. That was her edge. She always played the victim better when I was emotional. I wasn't going to give her that. Not this time. I took a walk that night after I got home from Maya's office. Around the block, around my thoughts. I passed the corner bakery Leah used to drag me to every Saturday before she got too busy. I passed the park bench we used to sit on when we had dreams about houses and babies and forever. And then I sat in my car, staring at the steering wheel, and made the decision that would change everything. If Bryce was going to lie in court for her, if he was going to stand on that witness bench and paint her as some innocent saint, then I was going to make sure his wife heard the truth. Her name was Tessa Holloway. I found it within 10 minutes. Public registry, social media, school directory. She was a second-grade teacher, married to Bryce for over a decade, and a mother of 2 little girls. There were pictures. Her holding her daughters in matching Easter dresses, smiling in front of a Christmas tree, hugging Bryce at some local fundraiser. She looked happy, the kind of happy Leah used to fake. I hesitated before messaging her, not because I doubted what I needed to do, but because I knew what it would do to her. I didn't want to be the one to drop the hammer on her life. But I couldn't let Leah rewrite the narrative, and I couldn't let Tessa keep living inside a lie. So I crafted my message carefully. Not cruel, not emotional, just the facts. "Hi, Tessa. I believe we should talk. It's about your husband and my wife." I didn't expect her to respond right away, and honestly, part of me hoped she wouldn't. Maybe I'd gone too far. Maybe this was just me spiraling. But 40 minutes later, my phone rang. "Is this Jared?" Her voice was light and hesitant. She sounded like someone trying to convince herself that the ground wasn't shaking. I introduced myself, kept it gentle. I told her I wasn't calling to hurt her, just to tell her what I knew. I didn't give her details right away. I asked questions instead. "Have you noticed anything different about Bryce lately? Has he been traveling more for business? Does he ever mention Aaliyah?" She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just got very, very quiet. "He forgot my birthday this year," she said softly. "That's never happened before. And he's been distant, distracted, short with the girls." By the end of the call, she had asked me to send whatever I had. Emails, receipts, photos, anything. I did. I sent it all. Every screenshot, every image, every timestamp. And she thanked me. Not because she wanted it, but because she had already felt it in her gut, and now she wasn't crazy for believing something was wrong. That's when I knew. This wasn't going to be about revenge. This wasn't about getting even. This was about pulling back the curtain so the courtroom would see Leah not as a victim, but as the architect of her own collapse. And if Bryce wanted to stand there and swear she was a good woman, he would do so with his wife watching from the back row, holding a folder full of truth. And that, more than any cross-examination, would speak volumes. The message that changed everything arrived at precisely 8:17 p.m. When the world outside my apartment window was already swallowed by the hush of night. I remember staring at my phone screen, heart pounding as I hit send, because this text carried the weight of my entire strategy. One wrong word, one misstep, and everything I'd spent weeks building could collapse. I had composed it carefully, 3 short lines of truth wrapped in courtesy. Hi Tessa. It's Jared Monroe. I have information about your husband and my wife that you deserve to know. Please let me explain. I pictured her face as I tapped out each word, her gentle eyes behind rectangular glasses, the soft curve of her lips when she laughed at a joke on her classroom smartboard, the way she held herself with quiet confidence when reading to her students. I felt a pang of guilt for dragging her into my battle, but I also knew that if I didn't do this, Leah and Bryce would craft their narrative unchallenged, and I'd be left with nothing but whispers of betrayal echoing through empty rooms. My phone buzzed almost immediately 40 minutes later, though it felt like an eternity, and I hovered over the incoming call notification, my thumb trembling above the green button. When I finally tapped to answer, her voice came through the earpiece, soft and shaky, a mirror of the turmoil I sensed echoing through water. Is this Jared? She asked, as though uncertain this level of intrusion could be real. I inhaled and steadied myself. Yes, Tessa. Thank you for calling. I know this is unexpected. I don't have any desire to hurt you, only to share what I've discovered. She paused, swallowed, and said, Okay, I'm listening. I explained the receipts first, describing how I had found them tucked inside Leah's purse. A pair of hotel invoices from a boutique downtown property, complete with dates that coincided exactly with the weekend trips she claimed were networking events. I could hear her breath hitch on the other end of the line when I mentioned the contact saved in Leah's phone as Lunch with Elle, and how those messages had revealed photos of a man leaning casually against a marble bar, the same man from the hotel receipt. That's, she whispered, voice breaking. That's Bryce. Her certainty pained me, because I knew she had suspected something for months. Long nights waiting up for him to return, birthday dinners canceled at the last minute, hushed phone calls that ended abruptly when someone entered the room. But she had brushed it aside, attributing it to stress or work fatigue. My intention had never been to shatter her illusions, but to deliver evidence her intuition already sensed, to give her the courage to step out of the shadows of his deception. She asked questions, pointed and precise. How often did this happen? What did the messages say? Did Leah know you found it? I answered each calmly, reciting dates and times like a litany of wounds, resisting the urge to let anger slip into my voice. I told her about the text exchanges I had printed, screenshots of affectionate good mornings sent from his work email, images of room service orders under her wife's name, hotel door cards with an embossed heart motif I recognized from the receipt logo. I told her how Leah had brushed off my suspicions when I brought them up, how she'd laughed and called me paranoid. And as I spoke, I felt the resolve in her voice transform. That tremor of uncertainty became a steady determination. I need to see those, she said at last. Everything. I confirmed her email address and forwarded dozens of files. PDFs of invoices, image files of text threads, photos I'd snapped of her husband's car parked inconspicuously at Leah's building. I watched the timestamps shift as she downloaded each item, and I imagined her sitting at her kitchen table in the soft glow of a desk lamp, evidence scattered in front of her like shards of broken trust. I waited in silence, my pulse so loud I could almost hear it echo in my ears. After 10 minutes, my phone buzzed again. A single line. Thank you. This explains so much. That message floored me. Not because she was grateful, though part of me recoiled at the thought of the pain it must cause, but because it marked a turning point. In that moment, we were no longer two strangers connected by circumstance. We were allies bound by the shared certainty that Leah and Bryce's carefully constructed lies would be exposed. I felt both exhilaration and dread, knowing what this collaboration meant. We would step into court together, armed with truth, ready to shatter the illusion of their perfect new life. We spoke for another 20 minutes, crafting a plan. She would reach out to Maya's office formally to retain counsel for her own divorce proceedings. She would apply for permission to attend my hearing as an observer and character witness, emphasizing that her testimony concerned credibility and truth rather than acrimony. I would prepare additional copies of every document and photo, organized in chronological order, ready for submission to the court clerk. We agreed on a code word, Project Horizon, for any urgent communication. The phrase felt strangely poetic, as though we were standing at the brink of a new sunrise after weeks of twilight. When we finally hung up, I sat alone in the dark, the glow of my laptop painting my face in ghostly light. My emotions tangled, relief that justice might finally prevail, guilt for the upheaval we had set in motion, anticipation of the moment when our evidence would collide with Leah's denials. I recalled the first time I walked into our home after discovering the receipts. A place that used to feel safe, now unrecognizable in its betrayal, and I realized how far I'd come since then. I had moved from stunned victim to strategic orchestrator, determined to claim my dignity back one document at a time. That night, I barely slept. Every hour, I checked my phone, imagining her reading our evidence, drawing strength from the proof we had assembled. I fell into a restless doze just before dawn, dreaming of a courthouse where truth echoed louder than lies. When the alarm clock jolted me awake, I felt a curious mixture of fatigue and clarity. The day of reckoning was near. Our silent partnership would soon speak loudly in the courtroom. And as I dressed and gathered my papers, I sensed that the message I had sent, the one that changed everything, was only the beginning of a truth that would no longer remain hidden. The din of the diner's neon sign buzzed in the humid afternoon air as I stepped through the door, my briefcase in one hand and a folder of evidence in the other, the weight of everything I'd discovered pressing in my chest like a fist. I found Tessa seated in a booth by the window, sunlight painting her hair in shades of auburn and gold, her posture poised but wary, a steaming coffee cup cradled between both hands. She looked up as I slid into the seat across from her, and I saw her eyes flick to the thick folder I placed on the Formica tabletop before settling back on my face. We sat in silence for a moment, just the quiet clink of dishes and the low hum of conversation around us, punctuated by the sizzle of the grill behind the counter. I could feel the urgency in her gaze, the earnest plea not to dilute the truth with emotion. So I reached into the folder and pulled out the first item. A stack of neatly printed hotel receipts, each one dated and time-stamped, each one bearing the name and logo of the boutique downtown property. I told her how I found them tucked into the back pocket of Leah's purse after returning from an out-of-town conference, how the totals matched exactly with the hotel's nightly rate, and how the billing name, Monroe and Holloway Retreat, had been disguised to look like a legitimate joint business expense. As she leaned forward, reading each line with trembling fingers, I saw something shift behind her calm exterior, an amalgam of disbelief, sorrow, and righteous indignation. Then I took out the next piece of evidence, a series of printed text message screenshots, each with its own timestamp and sender label, messages that began innocently enough, "Good morning, beautiful," and quickly escalated into conversational breadcrumbs that spelled out their weekends together, the inside jokes they shared in code, and, later, plans that included reservations under my name to ensure Leah's presence, all documented in crisp black and white clarity. I watched her jaw set as she read the messages, as though each word carved deeper into her realization. "He lied about everything," she murmured, voice low but fierce. I nodded and passed her a third stack. Copies of invoices for lingerie orders placed under her credit card, with descriptions of delicate lace sets and satin chemises marked, "Delivered to front desk." She flipped through them, her eyes narrowing, the edges of her fingers quivering as she touched the glossy paper. "He never brought these home," she said, the betrayal in her voice slicing through the din like a blade. I offered a sad smile, acknowledging the cruelty and how he had used her trust and her credit card to treat Leah to gifts meant to seduce, to conceal. Then I produced the final piece, photos I'd snapped through. Leah's office window, Bryce's black sedan parked below on multiple nights, its headlights glowing against the glass facade, his silhouette visible as he leaned against the frame, laughing with Leah as she emerged, flirtatious and triumphant. Each image was dated and timestamped by my phone's metadata, undeniable proof of the countless secret rendezvous. As I set the photos before Tessa, she closed her eyes for a moment, drawing a deep breath, as though steeling herself for the avalanche of truths she had to confront. When she opened them again, Her expression had hardened into a resolve I had only glimpsed once. During our phone call, when she decided she would not remain a passive victim, she folded her hands on the table and looked directly at me. "This is more than infidelity," she said in a steady voice that belied the storm brewing beneath. "This is deceit that spans years. He's stolen from me. Time I can never get back with my daughters. Trust that can't be rebuilt. Dignity he treated like a toy." I nodded, my throat thick with empathy. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," I said, voice gentle. "But you deserve to know every piece of this puzzle before it's paraded around as something noble in that courtroom." We sat back as our waitress approached with a notepad in hand. Tessa ordered a club sandwich and a Diet Cola. I asked for the same, needing a few moments to steady my thoughts before the next step. As the waitress walked away, Tessa reached across the table and brushed her fingers over the receipts and messages, as if to reassure herself they were real. "What now?" she asked quietly. I leaned forward, placing my hand over hers. "We go to court together," I said, the conviction in my tone resonating in the cramped space. "You'll testify to these documents. You'll tell the judge exactly what he did to your family. And I'll testify to everything Leah tried to hide. Our stories will intersect in that courtroom, and their facade will crumble." A few tears threatened at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away and smiled, a fierce, determined smile that bolstered my own resolve. "Then let's finish this," she whispered. We spent the next hour sorting the documents into a precise chronology, labeling each folder tab with care. January 12th, invoice. February 3rd, text messages. March 15th, lingerie order. And April 8th, photos. I showed her how to log into Maya's secure client portal to upload the digital files, and she practiced summarizing her testimony in bullet points. Starting with the date she first noticed the change in Bryce's behavior, then moving through the sequence of missed celebrations, intercepted bills, and final confirmations via my messages. By the time we left the diner, paperwork neatly stacked in my briefcase and Tessa's satchel, the sun had dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows through the parking lot. We shook hands in a pact of solidarity, two strangers bound by a shared purpose, two wounded hearts determined to speak truth into a system that prized perception over reality. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Tessa stepping confidently toward her car, her silhouette framed by the neon glow of the diner sign. In that moment, I felt the pieces of my own healing click into place. We had done more than expose lies. We had reclaimed our stories. And soon, in that courtroom, our voices would resonate louder than any false testimony Leah and Bryce could muster. I remember the afternoon of the court date reveal with vivid clarity, how the sun slanted through the half-drawn blinds of my lawyer's office and lit the specks of dust dancing in the stale air. How the clock on the wall ticked with a steady insistence that today was the day everything would change. Maya Griggs sat across from me behind her cluttered mahogany desk, brows knitted together as she reviewed the joint docket. "They finalized the hearing schedule," she said softly, tapping a page where my name and Leah Monroe's were printed in bold type. My chest tightened as she pointed to the date and time, May 22nd, 9 a.m. The words leaped off the page, a countdown marking the climax of 3 weeks of planning and preparation. She looked up at me, her eyes steady and reassuring, and added, "Your filing to include a third-party observer was approved. She'll be permitted to speak if duly summoned. I spoke with Judge Whitman's clerk this morning." I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry, and nodded. "Tessa will be there," I said, the simple certainty of it resonating in the quiet room. I thought of her, standing in that diner booth, her fingers tracing the edges of the evidence we had laid out like a mosaic of betrayal. I thought of the courage it had taken for her to stand with me, to cross that threshold into another person's legal battle when she herself was embroiled in the ruins of her own marriage. I felt both humbled and emboldened by her partnership, by the knowledge that this hearing would no longer be a one-sided performance of Leah's carefully cultivated victimhood, but would instead showcase the raw, unvarnished truth of her duplicity. That evening, I called Tessa from my apartment, pacing between the windows as the city skyline darkened against a backdrop of twinkling lights. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear the faint hum of a classroom projector behind her, reminding me of the life she was trying to preserve for her daughters, a life that now carried the shadow of her husband's betrayal. I spoke calmly, outlining the schedule, the courtroom layout, the moment I planned to introduce her testimony. Together, we rehearsed the exact phrasing she would use when the bailiff swore her in, her name, her relationship to Bryce, and the simple assertion that she intended to speak to his credibility. We practiced how she'd present the documents, handing each folder to Maya, who would then distribute them to the court clerk and defense counsel, ensuring no further objections could derail their entry. By the end of the call, our voices were steady, our resolve hardened like steel tempered in fire. We had transformed from wounded spouses into a single force determined to shatter Leah's illusion, and I felt a profound gratitude and a twinge of sorrow for everything she had endured. The next morning, I arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual, the stone entrance cool beneath my hands as I touched the columns for reassurance. Maya followed shortly, briefcases in hand, and we exchanged a nod before ascending the steps together. Inside, the lobby buzzed with activity. Jurors sitting on wooden benches with numbered badges clipped to their jackets, lawyers conferring in low tones, clients clutching water bottles and legal pads. My palms were sweaty as I signed in at the clerk's window, handed over my exhibits in duplicate, and received my courtroom badge. Maya whispered, "They've set you up in courtroom 3B. We'll start with opening statements at 9:15. I thanked her and stepped toward the heavy oak doors, pausing to straighten my tie and smooth the front of my jacket, as if preparing for a ceremony rather than a battle. When the doors opened, I stepped into the hush of the courtroom, the air thick with anticipation. Leah and her counsel occupied the front row on the plaintiff's side, Leah's face composed but her eyes cold and distant, while Bryce sat beside her, scanning the room with an air of arrogance. My gaze moved past them to the gallery, where I spotted Tessa already seated in the third row, clutching a slim black satchel to her chest. Her posture was erect, her expression unreadable, but I sensed a vibration of determination emanating from her. As I took my place at the defense table, I felt an unexpected calm wash over me, an assurance that by my side sat the person most capable of undermining Leah's narrative. Judge Whitman entered and took her seat on the raised bench, her robes swirling quietly as she settled in. The bailiff called the docket, and when my case was called, the judge's gavel struck once, twice, and everything fell silent. Leah's attorney began with her opening, weaving a narrative of my alleged neglect, my own failings as a husband, and the necessity of her new relationship with Bryce as evidence of her reasonableness. Bryce was introduced as a man of impeccable character, someone who had witnessed Leah's unwavering integrity firsthand. He rose to his feet, adjusted his tie, and offered a brief, polished statement about Leah's compassion and honesty, his words smooth as silk. I felt the old knot of frustration twist in my gut, but I reminded myself why I had orchestrated this moment and focused on my breathing as I waited for my turn. Maya stood and delivered my opening statement with calm precision, outlining how Leah's testimony would be bolstered by false witness, how real character witnesses would reveal the true sequence of betrayal, and how the evidence before the court would demonstrate a pattern of concealment, deceit, and emotional harm that invalidated Leah's claims. Then she reserved the right to call additional witnesses, and I heard the judge murmur assent. Maya turned to me and nodded, and I rose to introduce Tessa Holloway as a witness. The bailiff escorted her to the stand, where she paused to adjust the microphone and affix her arm with a confident smile. When asked to affirm her testimony, she placed her hand on the Bible with the same calm dignity I had seen in her at the diner. She began by stating her name, her residence, and her marriage to Bryce Holloway for 12 years. Then, in a voice clear and unwavering, she recounted her experience, the gradual changes she noticed in her husband's behavior, the unexplained absences, missed anniversaries, and the moment she discovered the receipts I had handed her. She handed each folder to Maya, who labeled and provided them to the clerk with a respectful nod. Tessa described how the screenshots bore his digital signature, how the invoices matched his account, and how the photos proved his presence at Leah's office on numerous occasions. When she concluded by looking directly at Leah and stating that she did not hate her but hoped she would learn what genuine love and commitment meant, the courtroom fell into a stark, reverent silence. Leah's lawyer attempted an objection, but Maya deftly countered, citing the judge's prior approval of Tessa's participation. The judge overruled the objection, and the evidence stood indisputable before them. As Tessa stepped down, her gaze met mine briefly, a silent exchange of solidarity and relief. I felt a rush of triumph tempered by the solemnity of what we had both sacrificed to reach this point. The hearing continued with discussions of asset division and custody of our dog, but the narrative had irrevocably shifted. Leah's illusion of innocence lay shattered in the wake of Tessa's testimony, and Bryce's attempt to defend his wife had become his own confession of betrayal. When the judge adjourned the hearing, her parting words acknowledged the gravity of the revelations and granted me favorable terms. An outcome that, in that moment, felt less like victory and more like a restoration of dignity. Walking out of the courtroom, I saw Tessa waiting for me in the hallway. We exchanged a brief, respectful nod, knowing that no words were needed to express the depth of what had transpired. She slipped away toward the exit, and I turned to face my own uncertain future. The sun was shining once more, but I knew nothing would ever look the same again. And as I stepped into the light, I realized that sometimes truth does not demand a sword. It only needs the courage of those willing to bear witness. The morning of the hearing began with a quiet tension that wrapped itself around me like a second skin. I felt every heartbeat echo through my chest as I straightened my tie in the mirror and wiped away the sleep from my eyes. I arrived at the courthouse early, the grand steps gleaming under a pale sun, the air crisp with the promise of confrontation. I walked the echoing corridors with my lawyer, Maya Griggs, her presence a steady anchor in the swirl of anxiety. The courtroom doors loomed at the end of a long marbled hallway, and I paused there for a breath, steeling myself for what lay beyond. When I pushed through, the room felt impossibly silent, as though it had been waiting for this moment. Waiting to bear witness to the collision of truth and deception. Leah entered soon after, flanked by her attorney and Bryce Holloway, whose smug confidence was still intact in his measured stride. He caught my eye as he passed and offered a slow, mocking nod. I returned it with a calm, unwavering glance, my spine straight, my resolve firm. Leah swept to her seat with a quick glance at me. No pity in her eyes, only certainty that she held the upper hand. But 5 minutes later, the power shifted. The doors opened again, and in walked Tessa Holloway. She moved with quiet authority, her navy skirt suit a contrast to the lighter tones of the room. Every head turned as she passed by the gallery benches, the recognition dawning in Bryce's eyes faster than a flicker of guilt. His confident posture faltered for a heartbeat, and Leah's practiced composure trembled when she met the sight of Mrs. Holloway's steady gaze. Tessa paused in the third row, seating herself with careful precision, her posture erect, her hands folded in her lap. The courtroom held its breath as the bailiff glanced toward the judge, who inclined her head in acknowledgement of the witness's presence. At that moment, the illusion of control that Leah had clung to so fiercely began to crack. We began as expected, procedural matters, briefs, the judge's review of submitted exhibits. Leah's lawyer spoke first, her voice polished and rehearsed, painting Leah as the victim of an unfaithful husband who had abandoned her for me, her spouse of 4 years, despite my steadfast devotion. Bryce was called next. He rose and made his way to the stand, offering a formal nod to the judge, his confidence seemingly restored by his role as character witness. His testimony was short. He spoke of Leah's honesty, her compassion, her dedication as a mother, and the way she had supported him through the toughest nights of his career. I could see Tessa's jaw tighten as each compliment landed, each word forging the facade they intended to present. Then Maya rose and requested permission to recall the witness list, pointing toward the back of the room. The bailiff directed his gaze to the judge, who granted the request. "Please call Tessa Holloway to the stand," Maya said, her voice quiet but unwavering. A murmur rippled through the gallery as all eyes turned back to the third row. Tessa rose, smoothing her skirt, and crossed the aisle with slow, deliberate steps. As she mounted the steps to the witness box, Bryce's face went pale and Leah's lips parted in a silent gasp. Tessa placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat with a composed dignity that commanded the room's full attention. The questioning began simply, name, address, occupation, but it quickly cut to the heart of the matter. Under Maya's calm guidance, Tessa recounted the moment she first sensed something was wrong: a missed anniversary dinner, an empty chair at the table, the hollow excuse of business trip. She described nights spent waiting in the dark for her husband's return, only to find discarded receipts in his briefcase, emails she didn't recognize, and pings on her phone from a number saved simply as L. Her voice was steady as she detailed how she pieced together the timeline, the hotel bookings under Leah's name, the text exchanges that began innocently and grew intimate, The lingerie orders billed to her own credit card but never delivered to their home. Each piece of testimony was punctuated by a new exhibit, photographs, invoices, printed message threads, handed to the clerk and placed before the judge, the attorneys, and eventually, Leah and Bryce themselves. When the judge asked if she personally recognized the receipts and messages as authentic, Tessa nodded without hesitation. "These are from my bank statements," she said, voice unwavering. "I provided these to Mr. Monroe because I needed to know what was happening with my husband." Her eyes met Bryce's for a long, fraught second. He looked away, unable to hold her gaze. Leah's attorney attempted an objection, arguing that Tessa's emotional involvement made her testimony biased. But Maya was ready, citing the court's prior approval of Tessa's role and the relevance of her testimony to Bryce's credibility. The judge overruled the objection, and Leah's objection collapsed under the weight of prior judicial consent. Perhaps the most devastating moment came when Tessa paused, looked directly at Leah, and spoke plainly. "You didn't just betray my marriage. You robbed my daughters of the trust and security a home should provide. You took their father away from them." The words echoed through the vaulted chamber, and I felt the heavy hush settle like a blanket over everyone present. Leah's face whitened, her eyes filling with tears she could not disguise, and Bryce's posture slumped in defeat as he absorbed the magnitude of her accusation. Maya closed her questioning with a final request for clarity on the relationship timeline. "How long did this affair last, Miss Holloway?" she asked. Tessa paused, her voice steady despite the emotion she must have felt, and answered simply, 9 months. The courtroom seemed to vibrate with the weight of those 2 words. The silence that followed was absolute. It was as though the world held its breath while the spell of deceit was broken. When Tessa stepped down, a wave of realization rippled through the court. Leah's attorney faltered, her carefully constructed narrative in tatters. Bryce no longer fit the role of believable witness. Instead, he stood revealed as the very embodiment of the betrayal they sought to deny. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably, and from that moment on, every argument Leah made, every request she voiced, was tainted by the knowledge of her orchestrated deceit. The remainder of the hearing proceeded with a sense of anticlimax, asset divisions, custody matters for our dog, perfunctory exchanges of documents. But I noticed Leah's voice tremble as she spoke, noticed Bryce shrink in his seat, and felt a quiet triumph settle in my chest. When the judge finally pronounced her decision, awarding me the house, full custody of our dog, and a fair financial split, I heard the words as if through a veil, aware that the true victory had already been won when Tessa's testimony shattered their illusion. Stepping out of the courtroom into the bright afternoon sunlight, I saw Tessa waiting by the front doors. We exchanged a solemn nod. No words were needed to convey the depth of what we had achieved. She turned and walked away, reclaiming her life with her children, leaving Leah and Bryce to confront the ruins of their betrayal. And as I descended the courthouse steps, I realized that in the end, justice had been delivered not by my own words, but by the courage of a woman who refused to be silenced, who stepped into a courtroom in heels and spoke the truth with unwavering conviction. The gavel's echo had barely faded when Leah's attorney rose, perfect posture and practiced calm, to call Bryce Holloway to the stand. He stood with the same composed confidence he'd displayed throughout our marriage's final months, broad shoulders squared, chin lifted, eyes sweeping the courtroom as though he were accepting an award. I watched him step up, the polished wood of the witness box, reflecting the sheen of his cufflinks, and I felt a cool detachment settle over me. After all, I was no longer the man betrayed. I was the man wielding truth. Maya Griggs signaled to the bailiff, and Bryce placed his right hand on the Bible with a solemn grace he did not feel. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" the bailiff intoned. His voice rolled through the chamber like thunder, and I pictured the moment of reckoning that hung suspended between inhale and exhale. "I do," Bryce replied, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a flicker of uncertainty. Leah's attorney opened with a flourish. "Mr. Holloway, please describe your relationship with Mrs. Monroe." Bryce began with compliments, her dedication, her kindness, the way her laughter filled a room. He spoke of dinners she had cooked for him, holidays spent with his family, and the comfort she provided when his career left him alone at odd hours. The judge nodded as he spoke, his words weaving a tapestry of admiration. I felt my hands clench in my lap, The portrait he painted was nothing but a lie. But I remained still, my focus trained on the moment Maya would stand and unveil the cracks in his narrative. That moment came in the form of a single question. Maya rose, extending her hand toward Bryce with a calm authority that commanded attention without a word of aggression. "Mr. Holloway," she said softly, "how long have you been romantically involved with Mrs. Leah Monroe?" The courtroom air thickened. I felt the collective inhalation of every person present, the hush so complete it seemed to press against my ears. Leah's perfect smile faltered. Bryce froze, his confident facade splintering. His gaze flicked toward Leah, then toward the gallery where Tessa sat, arms folded and expression unreadable. The seconds stretched like hours. Finally, his jaw tightened and he exhaled. 9 months, he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. The words hammered through the courtroom, each syllable a blow against the illusion he and Leah had constructed. Leah's attorney gasped, Leah's face paled, and even the judge's stern countenance flickered in surprise. I felt a surge of vindication as the lie cracked open, spilling its contents for all to see. Maya didn't hesitate. She produced the first set of exhibits, hotel receipts dating back 9 months, each stamped with the Holloway Monroe suite number. The clerk distributed copies to the judge and counsel while Bryce's shoulders slumped under the weight of undeniable proof. But Maya was far from finished. She guided Bryce through a chronology of text printed in black and white clarity. "Can't wait to see you tonight, babe, missing you already. I've booked the suite under our names." Each message chipped away at his attempt to depict Leah as a purely virtuous partner. When Maya asked Bryce to confirm that the messages were exchanged on his personal phone and written in his own voice, he nodded, eyes fixed downward. The receipts, the messages, the photographs of his car outside Leah's office, they converged in a damning mosaic that no legal argument could dissolve. As Bryce sat back down, his face reddened and his posture defeated, Maya stood again. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady, "we call to the stand Ms. Tessa Holloway." I watched as Leah's attorney's eyes widened in panic, as Leah buried her face behind her hands. Maya's gaze flicked to me. I nodded imperceptibly. The momentum we had built these past weeks was reaching its climax. The bailiff called Tessa's name, and she rose from the gallery with a calm dignity that belied the turmoil she must have felt. Every step she took toward the witness box seemed to resonate through the room, as though the walls themselves anticipated her testimony. When she placed her hand on the Bible, her knuckles were steady. No tears, no tremors, only a resolute presence that radiated strength. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" She repeated, and I heard her soft, "I do," resound clearly. Maya's first question was simple. "Ms. Holloway, what is your relationship to Mrs. Monroe and Mr. Holloway?" Tessa answered succinctly, "I am Bryce Holloway's wife of 12 years, and mother to our 2 daughters." She paused, then added, "I am also a party in my own divorce proceedings relating to these facts." The words landed like stones in a still pond, rippling outward through the courtroom's collective consciousness. Then Maya guided her through the timeline. Tessa described that first missed anniversary, the roses he never delivered, the reservation he canceled at the last minute. She spoke of the lingerie receipts, how she had traced charges on her card for delicate lace she never received. She recounted the hotel invoices hidden in their home office, the photographs she later found of her husband standing outside Leah's suite, smiling in a way that belonged to someone in love. Each exhibit she introduced, carefully marked, chronologically ordered, served as a nail sealing the coffin of Leah and Bryce's deceit. When Maya asked Tessa how she felt upon seeing the evidence, her voice remained measured. "I felt my world tilt off its axis," she said quietly. "I felt anger, sorrow, and a loss of trust so profound it cannot be repaired." She looked directly at Leah for the first time, her gaze unwavering. "You did not just betray me," she declared. "You erased years of marriage, memories with my children, and shattered the foundation of our family. I do not hate you, but I want you to understand the weight of what you have done." Silence enveloped the courtroom. Even the judge seemed to pause, absorbing the gravity of her words. Leah's attempted murmurs of objection were cut short by the judge's firm admonition. There will be no outbursts. The air felt colder, the truth's presence palpable. As Tessa stepped down, her mission accomplished, I realized that the hearing's outcome no longer depended on legal minutiae. The emotional truth had spoken louder than any argument. The remaining discussion, asset division, custody of our dog, felt like an afterthought. When Judge Whitman delivered her ruling, favoring my requests in full, it felt less like victory and more like justice served. Exiting the courtroom, I found Tessa waiting at the threshold. We exchanged a silent nod, the unspoken acknowledgement of shared purpose and shared pain. She walked away toward her new future, and I turned back to face my own uncertain path, grateful that sometimes, when lies are built on sand, all it takes is one courageous witness to make the whole structure collapse. As the courtroom settled back into its tense rhythm after Bryce's damning admission, I felt an electric charge in the air, the kind of anticipation that shivers along your spine and makes every nerve stand alert. I knew the next moment would define everything. Maya gave me a brief, imperceptible nod and then turned her attention to the bailiff, who cleared his throat and called, "Miss Tessa Holloway, please take the stand." Time seemed to stretch as the doors opened once more and she entered, her stride calm and steady, though I could sense the weight of the moment pressing on her shoulders. Every head in the room pivoted toward her, and I caught Leah's eyes flicker in panic before she looked away, as though that single glimpse confirmed the nightmare she had tried so hard to bury. Tessa approached the witness box with quiet dignity, each step echoing softly against the polished wood floor, and I watched her slide her right hand onto the Bible, straightening her spine and sweeping her auburn ponytail over her shoulder in one fluid motion. The bailiff's voice rang out. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" I held my breath as she looked directly into his eyes and answered clearly, "I do." In that instant, I felt a surge of something fierce and righteous pulse through me, pride in her courage, relief that the burden of her secret would finally be lifted, and a fierce determination that this testimony would shatter the last remnants of Leah's false narrative. Maya rose with the poise of a practiced advocate and began her examination with a question that would open the floodgates. "Ms. Holloway, please state your full name and your relationship to Mr. and Mrs. Monroe." Tessa's voice was calm, measured, yet carried an unmistakable undercurrent of steel. "My name is Tessa Claire Holloway," she said, enunciating each word with precision, "and I have been married to Bryce Holloway for 12 years. I am also the mother of our 2 daughters, and I am here to speak to the truth of his character and the nature of his relationship with Leah Monroe." A hush fell over the room as those words landed, framing her not as a mere supporting witness, but as a central figure whose testimony would upend every carefully crafted lie. Leah's lawyer attempted a cursory objection, arguing that Tessa's personal involvement rendered her testimony biased, but Maya anticipated the gambit and countered swiftly, reminding the judge of the prior approval for Tessa's participation and emphasizing the direct relevance of her testimony to Bryce's credibility. The judge nodded firmly, overruling the objection, and I felt the air itself seemed to grow heavier with the weight of impending truth. Then Maya guided Tessa through a succinct but devastating chronology. She asked about the initial signs of change in Bryce's behavior, missed anniversaries, last-minute conference calls that turned out to be private dinners, and honeymoon suite-sized hotel bookings that appeared in his name but were never explained. Tessa recounted the February dinner that he abruptly canceled, leaving her alone at a romantic table set for 2, her heart sinking as she read the cancellation notice in an email forwarded by the hotel. She described how, a month later, she discovered a lingerie invoice under her credit card, fragile lace sets and silk chemises she never received, and how he dismissed her distress with platitudes about work stress. Each anecdote she shared was punctuated by a gesture toward the neatly organized exhibits on the evidence table. Exhibit A, the emailed cancellation. Exhibit B, the lingerie receipt. Exhibit C, the hotel folios. I watched as the clerk distributed copies to the judge and counsel, each document a nail in the coffin of Bryce and Leah's deceit. Perhaps the most wrenching moment came when Tessa described the first time she saw photographs of her husband outside Leah's office. A sobering revelation delivered by Jared himself. She spoke of the shock that flooded her chest when she recognized his sedan parked beneath gleaming windows late at night, headlights casting long shadows that suggested clandestine embraces. Her voice quivered only for a heartbeat when she recounted scrolling through hotel door cards bearing the suite number that matched her credit card billing, proof of intimate encounters conducted behind her back. But then she steadied her tone and carried on, as if each detail strengthened her resolve rather than eroded her spirit. When Maya asked her how she felt upon confirming these betrayals, Tessa paused, her gaze sweeping the courtroom as though taking measure of every soul present, before she answered. I felt my world fracture. I felt the warmth of my home vanish, replaced by icy certainty that my marriage had been built on lies. I felt grief for my daughters, whose memories of their father's love would now be tainted by this truth. The judge leaned forward, lips pressed in a thin line, and I could see Leah's immaculate composure finally crack as tears welled in her eyes. As Tessa concluded her testimony, Maya asked her to summarize in her own words what it meant to testify here today. Tessa looked directly at Leah, her voice soft but unwavering. Mrs. Monroe, you did not merely have an affair. You constructed an elaborate deception that stole years of trust and memories from my children and me. I do not bear you hatred. I bear only the hope that the truth you now know will guide you toward understanding what real love and commitment entail. The courtroom went utterly silent, as though every person present had leaned forward to catch every syllable. Leah shrank in her seat, her cheeks stained with tears she tried but failed to brush away, while Bryce stared at the bench, unable to meet his wife's eyes. Even the judge paused, closing her notebook with a deliberate, thoughtful gesture. When Tessa stepped down, the energy in the courtroom had shifted irrevocably. The subsequent proceedings, asset divisions, the matter of our dog's custody, final arguments played out in a haze, as though the true battle had already been won. When Judge Whitman's gavel finally struck and she announced her ruling in my favor, awarding me the house, full custody of our dog, and an equitable financial settlement, the words felt both momentous and almost incidental in the wake of Tessa's powerful testimony. As I gathered my papers, I looked up at her in the gallery. Our eyes met across the room, and I saw in her expression a mixture of relief, resolve, and the quiet dignity of a woman who had reclaimed her voice and her life. When we finally exited the courtroom, the sunlight outside felt unusually bright, but I carried an inner illumination greater than any dawn could offer, the knowledge that sometimes truth does not need to raise its voice, it only needs a brave heart willing to speak. When the judge's gavel came down the final time, its sharp rap fractured the tension that had clung to the courtroom walls all morning. I sat back, chest heaving, as Judge Whitman announced her decision. I would retain our home, gain full custody of Baxter, and receive a financial settlement reflecting Leah's misrepresentations. Across the aisle, Leah's shoulders sagged, her confident posture gone, replaced by hollow defeat. Bryce sat rigid beside her, eyes cast downward as if each word hammered him anew. The courtroom felt strangely still, the usual rustle of papers and murmurs replaced by the echo of truth's victory. I watched Leah bury her face in her hands, and for the first time, I felt genuine sorrow, not for her loss, but for the betrayal she had orchestrated. When the bailiff called the session closed, Maya nodded at me with a quiet smile, and I gathered my folders, evidence still warm with the story we had revealed. Passing through the courtroom doors, I inhaled freedom's cool air and spotted Tessa waiting just beyond the threshold. We exchanged a brief nod, no words needed, to acknowledge the justice we had achieved together. In that moment, I understood that sometimes the sharpest blade isn't wielded by a hand, but delivered through unwavering truth. The courtroom doors closed behind me like a final seal, and I stepped into the humid afternoon air feeling both lighter and heavier than I had in months. Lighter because the truth had been spoken and accepted. Heavier because a chapter of my life had ended in irrevocable ways. I made my way down the courthouse steps, each footfall echoing in the marble corridor as Leah's defeated sobs drifted faintly behind me, mingling with the distant clack of heels and the murmur of departing onlookers. Tessa waited at the corner, sunlight glinting off the windows of her car as she folded the strap of her satchel over her shoulder. Our eyes met for a single, wordless moment, a nod of solidarity that spoke of battles fought and dignity reclaimed. I offered her a small, grateful smile before we turned in opposite directions. She toward the life she would rebuild with her daughters, and I toward the quiet sanctuary of my empty home. Driving through familiar streets, I passed the park where Leah and I once strolled hand in hand, the coffee shop where she habitually ordered our favorite blend, and the little townhouse with the white picket fence I had yet to repaint. Each landmark felt simultaneously comforting and painfully alien. I realized that the house I would keep, the house I'd fought for, would now stand as a testament to both what was lost and what I had preserved: my integrity, my peace of mind, and the solitary companionship of Baxter, our dog whose loyalty had never wavered. When I pulled into the driveway, the late afternoon sun slanted through the oak trees, casting dancing shadows across the lawn. Baxter bounded toward me, tail wagging furiously, and I knelt to scratch behind his ears, the weight of relief settling into my bones. In that moment, the emptiness of the rooms no longer felt like a vacuum of loneliness, but like a canvas of possibility, awaiting new memories unburdened by deception. Over the next weeks, Tessa and I did not become friends. That was never our goal. But we exchanged brief updates on courtroom notifications and shared a mutual understanding of the emotional labor we had both borne. She sent a note of gratitude when her divorce was finalized, and I replied with wishes for brighter days for her girls. I focused on restoring my life in subtle ways, repainting the walls in my favorite sage hue, replacing worn furniture, and reorganizing my bookshelf to reflect my own evolving journey. Every morning, Baxter and I walked the neighborhood, breathing in the crisp dawn air, forging a new rhythm untainted by the ghosts of my past marriage. One evening, as I prepared dinner for one, a simple pasta with fresh herbs, I paused by the kitchen window and noticed the way the twilight sky glowed in muted indigo, the first stars prickling through the dusky veil. I raised a glass of red wine to the empty counter and whispered a quiet toast to resilience, to truth, and to the unexpected alliances that deliver justice in ways no sword ever could. And though I did not know what the coming months would bring, new relationships, new dreams, or the gentle unfolding of contentment, I felt in that instant a profound peace. Sometimes, the hardest battles are not fought with force but with steadfast honesty, and sometimes, the greatest victories come in the aftermath, when the echoes of a gavel's strike fade into a life reclaimed.